Defense, a weekly review of strategic affairs, security, intelligence, and more, brought to you in cooperation with Israel Defense Magazine. In this edition, the latest on the new aerial offensive against the Islamic State, and a behind-the-scenes look at the third annual conference on unmanned vehicles. Amid much debate on the U.S. strategy against the Islamic State, the United States launched a new aerial offensive against the militants with a clear target outlined by President Barack Obama to, quote, degrade and destroy the growing threat. But he didn't say it would be short or easy. More in this next report.
We will conduct a systematic campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists.
In the new aerial offensive in Iraq against the Islamic State, most of the airstrikes are from bases. The Pentagon is not disclosing where the warplanes being deployed over Iraq are taking off from, but judging by past operations in the Middle East, the U.S. military is using several large air bases it's built.
Qatar provides the U.S. military with exceptional access to two major Qatari military installations, Al Udeid Air Base and Camp As-Saliyah, perhaps CENTCOM's most important operating installations outside of Iraq. Qatar charges no rent for them. Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait is a Kuwaiti Air Force installation with part of it designated for operations by the U.S. Air Force and its allies. Ali Al Salam Air Base is a small yet highly guarded base. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates is located about an hour outside Abu Dhabi. The U.S. Air Force operates KC-10 refueling planes, which are involved in operations over Iraq. Sheikh Isa Air Base is located on the 240 square mile island nation of Bahrain, situated off Saudi Arabia's eastern coast. This base hosts the BAAF fighter wing and the two squadrons that comprise it. Another base of operations is the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier, which relocated to the Persian Gulf and is launching its F-18 Super Hornets at targets in northern Iraq.
Other participants in the offensive include the British Royal Air Force with its Tornadoes and French Air Force with its Rafale fighter jets. At the moment, both countries are conducting surveillance and reconnaissance sorties. Prior to the new campaign, both countries carried out some humanitarian airdrops helping Iraqis suffering Islamic State attacks.
We must combat ISIL. This is a terrorist movement, and this means that we cannot rule out any means whatsoever.
Australia also announced it's joining the coalition against the Islamic State. During the ongoing war in Afghanistan, the Royal Australian Air Force gained much experience working side by side with the Americans. Taking off from land or sea, the question remains whether airstrikes will be enough to take the growing threat posed by the Islamic State. Or, despite Obama's obvious reluctance, will boots also be needed on the ground?
And joining me now in the studio is Major Andre Haider from NATO's Joint Air Power Competence Center in Germany. Thank you very much for being with me. So before we get into what we just heard in this report, what drones can actually achieve in this kind of campaign, you are one of the foremost experts on unmanned systems. Tell me a little bit about what you do at the Joint Air Power Center.
The Joint Air Power Competence Center, or short JAPCC, how we call it, it's a center of excellence for NATO, and it deals with air and space power and unmanned systems, or drones, like you will call it in this show, is one part of it. And we are a sort of academic institution which makes research and gives recommendations to the key decision makers of NATO to help them with their decisions.
So what you do, sadly, much of what you do, I think, is probably secret, given that you're advising some of the most important countries involved in all of these fights around the world, IS, of course. We heard in this report a little bit about this use of drones is, of course, a major part of the strategy, from Obama's strategy in Yemen and Somalia to now. What can drones achieve in this kind of fight? What is the strength of drones here?
I think the strength of drones is that you won't harm own personnel, friendly personnel. If you can send an unmanned platform instead of a manned platform, you keep your pilots at a safe distance.
How strong are they in terms of their two main purposes? There's one, I understand, intelligence gathering, and the other is actually to strike targets. Is it stronger in one or the other in terms of the technology?
In terms of intelligence, reconnaissance, they are more advanced than manned systems because of their extended endurance and loiter time. You can stay for many, many hours, up to days, over a target area. And with a manned aircraft, this is simply not possible. In terms of weaponry, if the drone is armed, you may achieve the same effects like with any other manned air platform. So actually, it depends on the weapon you choose, and actually drones can carry almost the same weapon types as manned aircraft.
So you were at this conference that we'll get into a little bit later in this edition on unmanned systems that's going on here in Israel, the third annual conference. And you gave a presentation, I understand, right here exactly on the vulnerability analysis of these systems. So I want to, of course, begin at least to ask you, what are the shortcomings of drones? Where are they vulnerable?
Actually, the shortcomings are they have no built-in survivability right now. In contrast to manned aircraft, which always focused on the survivability of the aircraft and the pilot, of course, current drones lack any defensive measures. They have no warning systems, they have no countermeasures, and this is because it was simply
not... So they're completely exposed in the battlefield?
Actually, yes. It was simply not needed up to now.
If it wasn't needed, tell me a little bit about then where it started. How did they develop?
Okay, they developed very early, but when they come into really heavy use, that was right after the attacks on the United States on the 9/11. And when the war on terrorism started in Afghanistan, we first tried to use drones for reconnaissance, and it worked very well. And the next step was actually...
So was this, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, was this sort of the coming of age of drones onto the scene? Because publicly we hear about it a lot and more in recent years, but for someone like yourself who's been dealing with the systems themselves for so long, is it a new phenomenon? Did it start with Iraq and Afghanistan?
It did not start, it started earlier, but that was really the phase where it becomes popular, because they were of high need. They could provide intelligence and reconnaissance, which couldn't be provided before. And the reason why we have the problems right now that they are not survivable is there were no air threat. Terrorists, insurgents, they were simply not capable of fighting drones or just fighting any aircraft. They simply hadn't the weapons.
This is a very important point, I think, that I want to get to more, why they work in Afghanistan, where else they can work. Major Haider, we'll get back to you then in just a moment. But first, as we mentioned, the Israeli unmanned vehicles industry has been making headlines in recent years, with drones playing a major role in all the latest conflicts from Gaza to Iraq. So it's no surprise that the third annual Unmanned Vehicle Conference has generated much interest. I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari went there.
Wednesday marked the third annual Unmanned Vehicle Conference organized by Israel Defense and held near Ben Gurion International Airport. A chance for Israeli and international defense companies to showcase the latest developments in the field. When it comes to unmanned vehicles, much of the focus usually centers on drones, especially in Israel, a world leader when it comes to this kind of technology.
There are many articles about our capabilities, but to see it and to touch the items, it is much more effective and efficient.
Indeed, drones have been in the headlines recently with the U.S. aerial campaign against the Islamic State in full swing over Iraq, and controversy is never far from this subject, as evidenced in the targeted killings of Hamas operatives during Operation Protective Edge. At the conference, however, things were more upbeat, with manufacturers eager to hawk their goods.
This system is the Orbiter 3, a small tactical UAV that's flying on basis of electrical engine, fly to an altitude of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet with endurance of 7 hours, very quiet, invisible, with a distance of 150 kilometers, very sophisticated system, fully autonomous, very reliable.
International companies were also in attendance.
The company is an engineering company, and we know Israel is a very good country for lots of engineering work, both in the defense business as well as in medical.
A lot of the exhibitions that we see here at this conference actually focus on all sorts of add-ons and appliances that latch on to the unmanned vehicle technologies that we see displayed here. For example, all sorts of different cameras, thermal imagery, mapping software, and different developments that are really generating a lot of interest with the clients here. But not everyone was there to sell aerial technologies.
We can adjust anything we want, from the steering wheel to the pedal sensation And we can build specific dashboards and buttons that you have in the real car that you can let the operator feel exactly what's going on in the real world.
Israeli Minister of Intelligence Yuval Steinitz told participants that despite his own support for Israel's purchase of the F-35 fighter jet, he believes Israel should be moving even further towards unmanned technologies, adding that the F-35 would be the last manned fighter jet of its kind. Clearly, the wars of the future will look decidedly different.
And joining me from the UVID 2014 conference outside Tel Aviv is Dr. Yuval Steinitz, Israeli Minister of Intelligence and Strategic Affairs. Thanks very much for being with us.
Good evening, Nurit.
Dr. Steinitz, as we speak, American UAVs are operating over Iraq, and of course, during the IDF's Operation Protective Edge in Gaza, unmanned aerial vehicles were operating 24/7. How significant is the role of drones in today's battlefield?
Extremely significant. Actually, the time will come, and it's going to be very soon, that drones will be more significant than regular aircrafts. And most aircrafts will become drones, even supersonic battle aircrafts. It's inevitable. This is a technology. Israel was one of the pioneers of this technology, is still one of the leading technological forces in this area. But this is forthcoming, there is no doubt about it.
So the United States has, so to speak, launched its official air offensive against the Islamic State in Iraq, near Baghdad. Can you really destroy this threat without American boots on the ground?
Well, I don't know. Some troops on the ground should take place, but it might be Kurdish troops or Iraqi troops instead. It's not clear. You know, when you start a military operation, you don't know how it's going to develop, how fast it's going to develop. And therefore, some troops on the ground will be. Whether it will be American troops or only Iraqi and Kurdish troops, we will have to wait and see.
Turning to intelligence for a moment, as Minister of Intelligence, can the data provided by drones actually replace other means of gathering intelligence by human sources, for example?
Of course, drones replace human intelligence many times, like any other sensor. But in the end, since we don't have still artificial intelligence, in the end you need the human agent in order to analyze, in order to decide, in order to give orders. But some of the collecting work is being done by other machines like drones and others.
Dr. Yuval Steinitz, thank you very much for your time. And still with me here in the studio is Major Andre Haider of the Joint Air Power Competence Center, part of NATO. Thanks very much again for being with me. So we just heard Mr. Steinitz speaking a lot about the specifics of this kind of operation, of the American and joint operation against IS. I want to return to the big picture that you were speaking about before, that in Afghanistan, you mentioned that drones weren't a problem there because there's really no threat, nobody to shoot at them. If that's the case, what happens in Syria, for example? Are drones safe to use there?
Let's talk about one nation in general, which is capable of delivering air defense systems. Actually, no drone is capable of fighting against any air defense system. Even manned aircraft have big problems fighting against sophisticated air defense systems. The main reason is the drone operators have no warning systems which alert them. If some weapon is fired at a drone, the operator won't even know that it's fired at him.
So you gave a lot of recommendations. It seems like a very major vulnerability, especially given the current global picture. In this statement that you made at the conference, you gave over 100 recommendations, I understand, for how to improve this issue. What are two of the top of those?
I mean, the most simple one is we could adopt many defensive measures from manned aviation. It hasn't to be invented completely from the scratch. Just see what you can use from manned aircraft and then build it in. Another option is maybe the situational awareness of drone operators is actually quite low. You can build better cameras with a broader scope of view to enable them to see more than they see now. It's also often referred to as a soda straw view. They only see a small picture of their target, but they don't see the area around them.
So without some of these recommendations being taken, in the time that it takes to actually make the improvements in the technology, is it risky to use drones in these kinds of countries that do have an air force and the ability to shoot back?
it may be risky for the platform because it can be shot down, but it may be the better option instead of sending manned aircraft, because you avoid the risk of killing friendly personnel.
Well, that risk, of course, of combat troops and of manned aircraft is a major issue being discussed now, and that, of course, NATO is a very big part of. So it remains to be seen, I guess, where it goes. In the meantime, Major Haider, thank you very, very much for joining us here. And that concludes this edition of I-24 News Defense. Of course, join us, as always, next week, every Thursday, for another edition. In the meantime, find us online all the time at i24news.tv.